The UFL season is almost here as we get ready for kickoff. You can get ready for the UFL season with official gear like this from BreakingT. Just go to BreakingT.com/John Lewis and check out all the new official UFL gear.
And let's bring in Scott Adamson, AdamsonMedia.com. He's also the author of The Home Team, My Bromance with Off-Brand Football. And Scott has never one time asked me to pimp this book on this channel, but I do it every time because it is absolutely one of my favorite all-time alt football books. Scott, I appreciate you joining me to talk some Birmingham Stallions. You've been entrenched down there for quite a while.
Well, it is always a pleasure to be with you, my friend. It's always fun to talk about the Stallions, too.
Well, let's talk about it. And we're going to start with some positivity here. Now, this is, for those who know Scott or read him, he's had his heart broken over the years, and that's what kind of the book is about with the alt football in Birmingham. But Scott, you recently heard from the UFL Director of Operations, Daryl Johnston, who was in Birmingham, and you wrote a recent article on AdamsonMedia.com. He has a lot of alt football experience, and you wrote, and this was the quote, "I'm going to trust him and the UFL founders to do the right thing, however long it might take." And so I think there's some optimism there. This feels like a league that might be built for the long haul, especially, I guess there's, in comparison to other spring leagues.
Right. And anytime a league has come along, you hear from them that we've got the commitment. Like when the XFL was relaunched, we have a 3-year commitment. And then the Alliance, we have a 3-year commitment. Well, you can say that, but actually saying it and having it happen, they're very different things. But I do feel like you had Fox with the USFL, you got Redbird Capital with the XFL, and now they're working together. I think they do realize that this is not something that's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, or maybe even 5 years. And anybody, regardless of how much money you have, if you're in the business of making money, you want to see that happen sooner than later. But I do honestly believe that they're willing to kind of see what happens and see over time, whether, again, it's 3 or 5 years, what's our base attendance going to be? What is our average television viewership going to be? And then maybe work out from there.
Are you optimistic that it's going to be what it was before in Birmingham with the USFL when there is a new league here?
It's so hard to say because truthfully, Birmingham, from the standpoint of fan support, has really disappointed me because both seasons of USFL, the tickets were dirt cheap. And I remember thinking before the very first USFL game where Birmingham played the Generals, I told my wife I left the house like 4 hours early because I said, this is probably going to sell out. It's going to be a traffic nightmare. And then they ended up with 17,500 people. And yeah, there were weather issues, but that entire season, they never got beyond that. And then last season, I think probably they never released attendance figures, but I think probably the largest crowd was around 18,000. And I don't know if like the USFL was a victim of its own success in terms of the television product, because USFL and XFL both, that's an outstanding production. And I know a guy like myself who's gotten a little bit older, it's a whole lot easier when you've got great production values like that to stay home where you're 10 steps from the refrigerator and 30 steps from the restroom.
Right. Oh yeah. And the tickets, you're right. They were dirt cheap. I was down there that first year and it was a fun experience, but yeah, it seemed like for the Birmingham games, there were a lot of people, not, as you point out, not what I think they expected. But for the other games, it was sparsely attended, like, it happened in year 2 with some of these hubs. And, Daryl Johnston, he also, and maybe this plays into it, he said he had kind of suggested having 2 hubs, one of them being in Birmingham for the UFL with the other in Arlington. Do you think that might have played a little bit into the decision not to do it all in Arlington rather than Birmingham, because maybe the attendance wasn't what they had hoped for, and especially in year 2?
It may have, but I think ultimately it did come down to, you look at the airport situation in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I think it is a lot easier for these teams to fly out, on weekends. And the hybrid hub model, I hate the hub models. I know why they're doing it. I understand it. The hybrid hub model is much better than I think the USFL hub model, especially the first year. Even being in Birmingham, you've got the Birmingham Stallions and the New Jersey General. No, you had the Birmingham Generals, so the hybrid hub model for right now, I think, is fine, but still a league like this is going to have to really have community engagement. And you still can't have that right now. You can have it in Arlington. All 8 teams can go to schools and hospitals and do volunteer work in Arlington. But considering they're going to fly out on Friday and go to their home markets and play, they're going to have a really short time in the cities they represent. So, yeah, I do understand that they've got to do that now, but they've really got to think of getting to a point sooner than later when all the teams are actually in their markets and part of those communities.
Well, and that leads me into what I was going to ask you here, because as you are in Birmingham, does it feel like maybe the city and the fans there have lost a little bit of ownership? Because for 2 years, the Birmingham Stallions were there in the USFL and hubbed there and based there, but now they're not.
Yeah, it's there's a smallish, hardcore group of fans here, and they're great. I mean, they are really into it. I don't think it's going to affect them because they, I think, like us, understand that this is still kind of a proof of concept thing in terms of how this league is going to grow and how they're going to build it. But yeah, I think as the season goes on, because the last couple of years, there were times when you could go to the grocery store and you'd see a Stallions player. Well, if you go to the grocery store on a Wednesday during this spring, you're not going to see a Stallions player unless he just escaped, because, they're going to be in Arlington.
Right.
So, I don't know. I think that's more of a kid thing when you're looking at some of the younger fans, because, I just remember, I think it was the second year of the WFL, Matthew Reed and Art Cantrell were signing autographs at the strip mall. And I took my WFL ball to him, got him to sign it. That was still one of the great thrills of my life, and you had this just happen during a game week. And fans in Birmingham, Memphis, wherever, they're not going to get that during game week right now, with a hybrid hub.
Yeah, I mean, you're remembering that 50 years later. Can you imagine? There's probably some from, kids who got to do some of those community events in 2022 and 2023 that are kind of missing out on this. And you're right. It hopefully, we all want the success of, I think what the UFL wants to do is to eventually, kind of the USFL plan, will hub now and try to put these, teams and markets eventually. But as we know, let's get through a year first and get to a championship game, and then we move on. You've had a chance to talk to Skip Holtz several times. You and I were in agreement on one thing for sure. When he took that special assistant job with Northwestern, I thought that was it. That was going to be it for Skip Holtz. And you can kind of understand, as you mentioned in one of your articles, that pull of Saturday college football brings a lot of people back into it. But it was funny that Skip Holtz said when he took the job that he said, well, listen, I've got another gig that I have in the spring and I can't lose that. Were you surprised by that? Because I know I was.
I was surprised until I actually started talking to him both on and off the record. And he seriously loves this. I mean, when he says that he's having the most fun that he's ever had coaching, I believe him. And you can just, I mean, he's an enthusiastic guy. I mean, we've always seen that throughout his career, but now when he talks about it, I mean, he's really, really fired up, and you can tell that he believes in the mission. And I think he kind of likes the segue of what he's doing now, where he spent all those years as a college coach and he's helping these guys grow up to be better football players. He's still doing that to a degree. He's just trying to give them an avenue. They're already very good football players, but he's trying to get them to the next level. And I truly think he's all in. I would absolutely be stunned if he left this league as long as the league lasts.
Yeah, I agree now. Yeah, especially after, he's had back-to-back championships. You would think like a coach would say, okay, I've been there and done that. What more can I do? But yeah, when he comes back and he says like, yeah, I've got a job in the spring. I want to continue to do that. You talked about moving players up to the next level. He's had a couple here, with the kicker, Brandon Aubrey, Alex Magoo, of course, the quarterback who moved on to the NFL. Skip goes into training camp. He went into this training camp with, he went in with a bunch of quarterbacks. It seems like he's got a lot to choose from. I thought this would be Jamar Smith's team kind of no matter what. that will play out, I guess, in training camp. But what did you think about him continuing to add these quarterbacks as they went into the preseason?
Yeah, I mean, it's a full room now. I mean, you got Matt Corral. I know that was a big splash, and a lot of people are looking at him like, okay, people were expecting him to be an NFL big deal. So now is he going to be a UFL big deal? But you also have Adrian Martinez, Jalen Morton. I think it's going to be kind of fun to see how that plays out, because I believe the league is going to carry 3 quarterbacks this year. You don't know who the first one out is going to be, but I know Holtz, and he hasn't had the opportunity due to injuries, but I remember, I think it was the week before the Stallions' first game of their first season, he was already saying, I'm going to play Magoo and Smith both. One will be a starter, but I'm going to play the other one a lot. And of course, it didn't work out because Magoo got hurt. And then season 2, it was just the opposite. Jamar is supposed to be the starter. He gets injured, so then it becomes Magoo's team. What I'm really hoping, regardless of who the starter is or who the backup is, I hope they don't have to deal with those kind of injuries this year, because it would be really fun to see what kind of battle we're going to have in camp and then how that plays out when the season starts.
And the Birmingham Stallions go in with the most NFL experience so far, into training camp, which I think I continue to say every week. I always change my mind on who's going to be the favorite in this thing. But, I think that's got to be exciting for the Stallion fan base to have that much NFL experience and those kind of quarterbacks under a guy like Skip Holtz.
And it's fun, too, because normally you think of a league like this of having no continuity, but there is some continuity with the Stallions. CJ Marable's back, Scooby Wright. They have a lot of people who've either been with the team from the beginning or were with them last year. So there is some certain familiarity among the fan base now. And I think that really helps. When you start a league, you're thinking, well, you need to have local players, guys from nearby colleges. But the longer a league like this lasts, when you have returning players, all of a sudden they become your players. I mean, they might be from Arizona or wherever originally, but as long as they've been on your team for 2 or 3 years, you can identify with them more.
That you're right. That says a lot, because, Holtz kind of even said, like, every year you kind of have to restart every year in football, no matter the level. But to have that kind of continuity, I think that speaks to a lot, to what he has done there and what spring football means to these players. Because even though we're going into a new league and it's a merged league, it feels like this is the strongest that it is going to be. This could really work this year.
Yeah, to me, it's just wild to think, okay, you and I and others like us, and we are a tribe.
Yeah,
we're talking
correct.
about professional spring football for the 3rd consecutive year.
Right.
Normally, you get through one, and then if you ever have something like this, well, what happened? Why did the Alliance of American Football fold, or why did the XFL fail? Well, now we're not talking about a failure. We're talking about a merger, which is really stunning in a way.
Yeah, and I hope that I said before, I really thought that was going to be the key to success for spring football. I thought it might happen next year, but it happened, and it happened quickly. We mentioned at the starting here that you wrote the book about how many teams you have covered in Birmingham or have been a fan of growing up. I mean, you've got an Alabama Hawks here. Now, tell me about the Alabama Hawks.
Yeah, the Alabama Hawks, they were in the Continental League back in the late 60s, and they were actually based out of Huntsville, but they had very little fan support, especially in their last season. So they basically moved to Birmingham for their last 2 games. But I think their biggest crowd, or the biggest crowd they drew in Birmingham, I think was like 2,500. So they decided, Birmingham's not really the place for us either. But as it turned out, the league folded, so it really didn't matter. But I still have to show them love.
Well, sure. I mean, listen, we all love our T-shirts, right? And, looking at the banners behind you there, that just really chronicles, what a rich history that Birmingham has. So what is the tally here on how many teams that you have been a fan of or you have covered that were in Birmingham? And I'm going to go over under on 50.
Oh, I mean, Birmingham Americans, Birmingham Vulcans, Alabama Magic. That was the team I won the Name the Team contest for, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, also in the AFA.
Yeah.
Then you got the Stallions, Birmingham Fire, the World League.
Right.
And then I think there was a lag time until you went to the Canadian League and the Barracudas. Then there was the Birmingham Thunderbolts.
Let's never forget the Steel Dogs now.
Steel, yeah, that indoor football, that's always been kind of a niche thing. But yeah, had the Steel
Very
Dogs. That
nice.
was their first game too. But then you worked up to the XFL and then the Birmingham Iron of the AAF, and here we are with the Stallions now going into a team that took a legacy nickname and now they're entering their second league, which is kind of bizarre.
With that, let's bring in Bryan Kennedy from KMOV Television in St. Louis. Bryan, first of all, I got to ask you, I need to confirm here. I have a report that cacaw is still the law in St. Louis. Can you confirm or deny that?
Oh, trust me, I can confirm cacaw is the law, and we will see that as a fact when they roll into the Dome here in probably a little over a month or so.
Yeah, let's talk about that home opener on April 6th against the XFL champion Arlington Renegades. What a great way to start that home season. Do you think we're going to see the scenes that we saw from 2020 and even 2022 or 23 with St. Louis team being there and all the fans starting to pour in there?
So what's funny is, I started here. I'll be here 3 years this fall. So I missed like the first, I guess, iteration of the Battlehawks. And so obviously when we're doing newscasts, we're pulling video of like fans or whatever when we hear that they're coming back. And I was like, man, it was crazy. But one thing you saw, because once again, I'm a news guy, was the attendance kind of dropped off as the season went on. So I was like, man, what's it going to be like when they start back up? But dude, I mean, pulling up to that outside of the Dome, we're catching up with fans. They're going crazy. I have no doubt that they're going to be nuts again. Those games were fun. I shot, I think, all but maybe one home game just because I love football and I love atmosphere. And those games at the Dome had them both. It's going to be nuts again. I mean, they literally had a certain amount of tickets they needed to sell. And I think nearly every game they had to open up the top deck, the 400s, just to fit the fans in because they wanted to see football at the Dome.
Yeah, and let's talk about that Dome for a little bit. I know there's some renovations that are going on around there. Now, as far as inside the Dome, the good news is the turf is going to be replaced. Bad news is it's not going to happen this year. But when fans show up at the Dome, will they see some of these renovations around there?
Yeah, I know. Once again, I'm newer here, so I'd never really been in the Dome for anything. Coincidentally, the only time I'd been in the Dome before the Battlehawks game was my first year. I took my son to the Royal Rumble. They had it at the Dome.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So I went to that, and that was the first time I've been in the Dome. And admittedly, looking around, I was like, okay, this place has been through it. It's been through it a little bit when it's over. Right. But I know even when we were there, they've had some events over the past year. They're already improving. They're updating. I mean, because, the rumors and the idea was that St. Louis may even hold the championship. So, obviously, if they're going to host that or, it's been rumored, not confirmed, we'll see what happens. But they are definitely updating. And overall, I mean, the turf is the big thing. And I know, but they're improving a lot of other things to really make that experience better.
Yeah, let's talk about we are operating under the assumption that the UFL Championship is going to be there. RJ Young from Fox Sports kind of let the cat out of the bag with his article, and then he changed it really quickly after it was published and said there were rumors that it was going to happen in St. Louis. But I'm interested. I know because of how spring football is embraced in St. Louis that it makes sense to have the UFL Championship there, at least on paper. Do you think that, let's say the Battlehawks aren't in the championship, are they going to, will they have a crowd there for a UFL Championship?
That's what I don't know, right? I don't know if – I don't know. I mean, fans love football in general. I mean, the Battlehawks were, one or two steps away from making it last year to begin with. I think it'll be full. Now, will it be full like it is for Battlehawks game? That's a different question. But I think without a doubt, there'll be fans there. And, depending on how affordable tickets are, I think you can see fans think, you know what, I'll go see the UFL Championship because, why not? And it's funny when the news broke about it, when Fox Sports released that artial, we were actually having Darius Shepard, who's a receiver for the Battlehawks, and the Battlehawks media guy at our station. Yeah. And so we're like, people, our news people are asking us, like, is this true? Is this true? I'm like, well, I'll be here in 5 minutes. So we'll have your answer. And they were like, yeah, no, that's not official. But then the receiver, Darius Shepard, almost hinted that it is going to happen. So, I mean, it's all but official. I think they're just waiting to make it official.
Yeah, and I think we might hear that this week as they
Yes.
start to release some rules and the new merchandise, updated website, and all that. I know, you mentioned about how the Battlehawks were so close to getting to the playoffs, and head coach Anthony Beck was pretty vocal about he didn't like the way that the rules were and that the formulas were in place. That's going to change this year. I'm sure he's happy about that. He's made some of the media rounds. He's really been trying to drum up support on social media. Are you starting to see him? You said Darius Shepard was there in your station, but have you seen Anthony Beck out and about doing these kinds of fan events, things like that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think they have a fan event coming up here soon. I know they're kind of drum up support. The playoff thing was a big deal last year because it was funny. No one really knew what was going on until we got there. And we're like, wait, so you're telling me the Battlehawks may not make the playoffs, and they had this ridiculous season. So, but he was very vocal about that, and it's crazy how things change when you're vocal about them. So, but yeah, I think they're coming out here for a fan event soon, and what they did last year was probably about once every other week they would have different players and Anthony Beck out here for different stuff. Now, I know last year a big deal was they had Ricky Prohl as an assistant coach. He's not returning, which is unfortunate, but I'm sure they'll have assistants out here, on a weekly basis as we get closer to game time.
Yeah, I was able to come to a game last year. It was very fan friendly. It was they had a lot of things happening before the games. They had a whole little city set up out there with different events happening and all kinds of places to get merchandise, things like that. It was a good vibe. I'm going to say that. It was a really good vibe. What kind of vibe is St. Louis right now even though it's a different league, but the Battlehawks are back?
Yeah, I think people are pumped, man. I think people just want to continue to prove that Kroenke's wrong and Kroenke's an idiot and he doesn't know what he did by taking the Rams away. I think it's twofold. I think since I moved here right when that settlement and lawsuit was hitting, right? So I really learned, one, how much people hate Stan Kroenke and the Rams, and two, how much people want to prove him wrong, but also three, how much people just love football. And I think, when that team was leaving, they were just not good, simply not good. And people will say that was on purpose for Kroenke, but story for another day. But I think people love football here, and this is our opportunity to show they do. And people aren't paying. I mean, if you go to a Battlehawks game, fans are wearing Battlehawks gear. It's not like they're just showing up to check out a football game. You got grown men dressed as birds. So I don't think you don't think you do that if you're just trying to, show, that you're a sports talent. It's that you truly enjoy your team and you want to be there.
And you got grown men who did buy gear at the game too. And all.
There you go.
Of course. You talked about Stan Kroenke. Yeah, thanks to him and this settlement, what was it, like $800 million and to the city, with $30 million of that going to the renovations at the Dome. So I guess or at least the whole America Center there. So it seems like there is a little bit of payoff for the fans, even though they lost their NFL team.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna get a rich guy, hit him in his pockets, right? So that's it's kind of like a last laugh. For sure.
Before we continue, I want to let you know that Royal Retros is offering 10% off your order with the code JLS. They have a bunch of cool new releases and even merchandise from the old United Football League. Check out RoyalRetros.com, use the code JLS, and you will get 10% off your order.
Let's bring in James Larsen from Pro Football Newsroom. And James, you wrote an article that really breaks down very well all the TV coverage that's coming up with the UFL. And you pointed out that nearly 3/4 of the games will be broadcast on over-the-air networks, which led to a very, I think, important quote that you have in that article. There are no excuses for spring football not to work. Tell me about that sentence and why you believe that.
Well, John, that's a great question. Thanks for having me on.
Sure.
And it's one of those things where we've seen so many of these leagues come and go. And I feel like this entire time, the golden standard has been 2020 and what the XFL had then. You look at the numbers, you look at the ratings, you look at the attendance, you look at all of these different factors that went into 8 really strong brands. Like even some of the weaker brands in Tampa Bay and Los Angeles still did pretty well, all things considered. So what I mean by no excuses is we're kind of back to square one. You look at the fact that now we have Fox, ABC, ESPN all behind this league is very reminiscent of what we had back in 2020 when the XFL was putting up some really, really good numbers. So not to say that the XFL in 2023 and the USFL over the past couple of years, they had some decent numbers in their own regard, but they weren't up to the same level that we had in the XFL back in 2020. So the fact that we have those two major broadcasters back together, ABC and ESPN, and then of course Fox Sports, it's very similar to what the XFL had in 2020, and I think it should lead to some excellent ratings. I mean, like I said, there's no excuses for them not to have good ratings this time around.
That's right. And I totally agree with you on that. Now, you and I might disagree on something here, and I'll get to it. But to summarize it, you put it in your article, 10 games on ABC, 21 on Fox, 10 on ESPN, 1 on ESPN2, and 1 on FS1, which I think is, as we're speaking now, that's always subject to change. They can move something here and there. But the important thing, the vast majority of these games are going to be on over-the-air networks. Now, there are, I believe, 3 times you said in your article where there's going to be a crossover where the games will be regional. You're not a fan of that. My initial blush was I wasn't, but now I might be. And I'll explain that. But tell me why you're not a fan of that regionalization with those start times being the same.
My biggest issue with that is that the UFL is not necessarily an established league yet, right? You know, the NFL, they can do that because you're going to have millions of viewers for those games regardless of whether they're no matter what. With this league, you know, the USFL and the XFL, they struggled on a lot of those OTA games. I mean, the XFL had some decent numbers on ABC, but, you know, especially looking at the USFL, some of those Fox and even some of those NBC games, like where you had 600, 700,000, it's like, it felt like the ceiling was much higher for what it could have been. So I feel like in season 1, you want to get this thing in front of as many eyeballs as possible. And I think one of the unique things about spring football is that you have the opportunity to watch, or you should have the opportunity to watch all 4 games each week. Because, I mean, there's only 4 games every week. It's a 10-week season. So you're looking at that aspect where now, for a few of those games, like you said, it's 3 different instances. You're only going to be able to watch one of them instead of both of them. I mean, unless somehow, I'm sure there's going to be a couple people out there that somehow figure out how to watch both. But the general public is not going to be able to do that. So, that's my take on it. Is I feel like I said, it's year 1 of a brand new league. You want to get it in front of as many people as possible. We've already seen some of these numbers not be ideal the last couple of years. So I feel like that could hurt it. But again, it's only a couple of games, thankfully. So.
Right. Yeah. And when I first saw that too, and I read that in your article, I was like, yeah, this is a dumb idea. But the more I thought about it, my thought was, okay, if there's only one game, and let's say it's Arlington and Houston, okay, that's the one game. But now that there are no more, well, there is a hub, but no, they're not playing in hubs anymore. I thought, well, what if, Birmingham and St. Louis are playing? Would that be a game at the same time? And I'm not sure what they are, but just using those as examples, wouldn't that be an opportunity for people who are in Birmingham or St. Louis or in that general area to say, casual fans, I mean, and I think that's what's important. UFL has to get casual fans on board. They would be more likely to watch something in their region, just like the Arlington and Houston region would want to watch their teams, so to speak. So to me, I don't think that regionalization is going to hurt that much and might actually put it all together. They actually might get more viewers. Does that make sense?
Now that you put it like that, it does make sense. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I think it's one of those things where, like you said, we really got to get the casuals to watch this because there is a ceiling right now. What we saw in the USFL and the XFL of give or take around 1 million. A couple of those games, like the championships, of course, you got 1.2, 1.4, 1.5. There's the one USFL game where you had that nice lead in on NBC with the Kentucky Derby, and you got 2 million for that. But generally speaking, these numbers on OTA haven't been, and I guess by haven't been great, I mean, you look at what they had in the XFL in 2020, and it's not even close. So,
yeah, and I think you're right with this is a huge opportunity, especially on network broadcasts. I want to say that this year's slate has a potential to have record ratings in spring football, but I have to couch that. But I will have to couch that and say like in the modern era, because you probably don't remember the original USFL. That was a little before your time, but there was a time when it got 6 million viewers on ABC, like in 1984. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that we're going to see a 6 million view. And TV was very different in 1984, but nevertheless, I think we will see in modern era that there should be record ratings. To me, I think success would be on average about 1 million viewers. Now, you think it could be a little higher than that, right?
Like you said, TV's a lot different these days, and now with streaming services and all those different options you have there, and another thing is ABC and ESPN games; those will be on ESPN Plus, and those numbers weren't released last year. The Fox Sports app will be streaming the Fox and FS1 game, so it's one of those things where we'll have to wait and see. I think $1 million is pretty fair. I think $1 million would be good success when you look at the overall layout of having games on ESPN, ABC, Fox, but what we really need to see is some of these primetime games, some of these big matchups, right? Like, especially the middle of the season, big rivalries between, Birmingham and St. Louis or whoever it might be, Birmingham and Memphis, St. Louis and DC, some of those big matchups. I'd love to see them in primetime getting 1.8 million, 2 million, just hopefully we see that. And like you said, now that we have the 8 teams, they're all in their own markets. There's no more hubs, because that's another thing that I know the USFL took a lot of crap for last year with some of those games with low ratings. But it's like when the Houston Gamblers are playing the New Orleans Breakers on USA Network and they're playing in Memphis, realistically, how many people can we expect to tune into a game like that? Now you've got Birmingham playing against Memphis in Birmingham with a ton on the line in week 10 or whatever it might be. That's a game that should do good numbers.
Yep, I think you're right. I think, for us sicko diehards, we're going to watch no matter what. But
exactly,
you mentioned the casual fans; those are the ones who end up watching the product over the air, and then you've got to get those people back and invested. And a couple things, James, that I'm looking forward to seeing is, first of all, the initial ratings, because that's going to be pretty important barometer after the first couple of weeks, which those could be the highest of the season because of the curiosity factor. I mean, when the Alliance of American Football was first on CBS, it debuted on CBS, it had 3 million viewers in prime time. Obviously, that did not hold up as it went on and on. But so I'm interested to see what the initial ratings are. And then after maybe the curiosity factor with casual fans is worn off, let's go into midseason and see if those ratings are steady. They might drop, but I think that's going to be kind of the barometer of maybe success or at least fan acceptance. What do you expect out of that? And is that something that you would kind of keep an eye on as the season goes along?
100%. And, to your point, we can go back to the XFL in 2020 where they had 3 million viewers for a couple of those games there in week 1. And then by the time we got to week 5, which is the last week that they played for obvious reasons, we don't need to get on that story. But there, a couple of those games, I think were around 800, 900,000, but they were doing 800, 900 on cable. They were doing that on FS1 or ESPN on cable, whereas in the USFL, FS1 games were getting 300, 400,000. So that's the type of thing that hopefully they capitalize on. And like we mentioned, FS1 only has one game. ESPN2 only has one game. And ESPN is the primary cable network here. And I mean, ESPN is a massive sports channel. So you got to expect that those cable numbers are going to be up this year.
Yep. And hopefully we'll get 2 things. Hopefully we will get a lot of these streaming numbers released to us. And I hope we get attendance figures too, because that's going to be something interesting too. Now that there's no more true hub system, just the one in Arlington, and then they go to and play in their home arenas. I've been around a long time. I've seen a lot of spring football leagues try and fail. And, James, just in the last, 3 years, we've seen, we mentioned the Alliance of American Football, the 2020 XFL, by no fault of its own. COVID put an end to that. We've seen just so many, different leagues fail. But going back to what you said in this article about no excuses if this doesn't work, to me, with the backers that this league has, with the network backing that it has, if this doesn't work, to me, this might be the last time we see spring football on this kind of scale. Would you agree with that?
That's exactly what I meant by that point. Is
right.
This is it. This is the final stand, right? Because we've seen these leagues come and go. We see the potential that's there, but it just always feels like there's something getting in the way for these leagues at some point, whether it was COVID, whether it's the USFL and their hub model that definitely didn't help get more viewership, or in the XFL, you had a lot of those games on some smaller channels like ESPN2, like FX, and there's so many factors that we could break down and get into on that. But yeah, I think that this is, like you said, the backers, the fact that we've got Redbird Capital coming in, the fact that we got Fox Sports sticking around, this is such a strong foundation for a league that hopefully lasts 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Really, let's see them get past year 1, year 2, and then we can really start having those discussions about, all right, this thing's going to be around. But I'm excited. I think this is the platform for success right here. Like I said, if this one doesn't work, then yeah, it's over.
Let's bring in Nicholas Thorn here from Pro Football Newsroom. Nicholas, all of a sudden we've gotten busy here after we kept waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen with this merger, right?
Yeah, it's crazy to think, though. Last time I was on your show 6 months ago, we had 2 leagues. We were talking about players going to the NFL, and it's spring football, so a lot changes in 6 months. But now we've got through this process. We can kind of look at rosters and see where teams are at for the first time in a little bit.
All right, so what we're going to do here, and Nicholas is one of the best at breaking down personnel, so this is kind of an amateur versus a pro here, so we're going to see how this goes, and we'll see if we can agree on this. We're going to pick our top 3 teams as we see them, and then we're going to choose a player to watch on each of these teams. So, Nicholas, let's just go ahead and start off here. Who do you think is number 3 heading into the UFL season?
So my number 3 team is Arlington. The Renegades, obviously, XFL champions last year. They retained a lot of their roster. And the player I want to highlight specifically with Arlington is Devin Darrington, running back from the Orlando Guardians. They drafted in the XFL dispersal draft. He brings a different kind of vibe to that running back room, whereas they had a lot of plotters last year. And in general, the running back room was something that they lacked explosive plays from. He actually gives that to them. He had like one of the highest rates of like big plays last year for the Guardians, and I think that could be another thing to watch. Is as guys like Devion Smith start to get cycled out of that backfield, and he gets more snaps.
All right, well, I'll tell you who I've got at number 3 here, and we might agree a little bit on this. And I like the Memphis Showboats, and the reason I say that, Nicholas, is because I love what John DeFilippo did with New Orleans last year, and it feels like he brought in some of the best, really, of the breakers, including Sage Surratt, who I think was one of the best tight ends in the league. Memphis drafted wide receiver DeAndre Overton from Philly, which leads me to my player to watch, and that's easy for me because it's former Stars quarterback Case Cookus. Because as many people out there know, Cookus went to the 2022 title game, USFL title game. He had a good 2023, despite it felt like he was sacked. He was behind an O-line that really didn't protect him, I thought, as well this past season. Now, Cole Kelly, who was a starter there, was kind of middle of the pack for Memphis. Seems like John DeFilippo brought in Cookus to kind of upgrade that position, so we'll see on that. So that's my number 3. Who's your number 2, Nicholas?
Yeah, with Memphis especially, when you're adding a top quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end out of a draft, you did pretty good. But for my number 2, I'm going with DC. This is a little bit higher than most people are going to have them because of the quarterback position. I just am so high on that roster that it doesn't bother me having a Jalen McClendon at quarterback for the time being. Although if Jordan Teamu was to be added to that roster, they really contend with number 1, who we'll get to in a second. But I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to name 2 players for DC in Trent Harris and Tim Ward, the 2 edge rushers from the Roughnecks last year. They were a great duo when they were both healthy. Tim Ward missed most of the second half of the season. They week 1 last year had a combined 6 sacks against the Guardians. The Guardians have a bad offensive line, but still they can pressure the quarterback. And DC already had a pretty good edge group, but these 2 guys are, to me, the 2 clear starters to start out this year. And I think this defense is going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yep. No, you can cheat. That's fine. Take as many players as you want because no one knows players like you, man. If anybody who has read your work on Pro Football Newsroom, they know about that. For my numbers, and I really wanted to go with the defenders, but that quarterback situation, it was really hard for me to try to pick them at number 2. Now that said, I'm going to cheat here because my number 2 team is the St. Louis Battlehawks because they had the XFL's leading touchdown passer in AJ McCarron. But, head coach Anthony Becht, I think he's picked up some talent offensively. I love the Jakur Pearson pick. The receiver from Seattle led the league in receptions and yards. Becht felt to me, Nicholas, like he really looked like he was trying to rebuild the Battlehawks defense as well because they lost a lot. And that kind of leads me to the player to watch is we go into the 2023 UFL or 2024 UFL season, and Quinterio Cole is another former Sea Dragon who is a defensive back, outstanding in Seattle. He had some time in 2022 in the NFL. So I think that could be a player to watch as St. Louis tries to maybe revamp a little bit of the offense, but certainly revamp that defense. And I think he could be a leader. I think Cole could be a leader for St. Louis on defense. So that's my number 2 team. So let's see if we're going to agree on the number 1 team. I don't think we will, but let's go for it.
We'll see. So my number 1 team is the Birmingham Stallions. I really wanted to get cute and pick someone else, but I mean, just looking at the roster, it's really hard to.
Yeah.
They added so many pieces before the draft that are legit NFL talents. And the one that's the most intriguing to me is former Clemson wide receiver Amari Rodgers. Just a couple of years ago, he was a 3rd-round pick in the NFL. Left the league very quickly due to some fumbling issues, struggled in Green Bay, struggled in Houston. But he's a guy who in a spring football league, he has immense talent. And I think right now you look at a pretty good receiving core, but he could potentially be a true difference maker in a league like this. As a guy who, if he puts it all together, he's only 24 still somehow, despite being washed through the league. I think he's a guy to really keep an eye on as a potential high talent player for this league in 2024.
Well, now I feel good about my number 1 pick because we agree. I have the Birmingham Stallions up there. That another team really that on the outside might look like they have some quarterback issues because Alex Magoo, went to the NFL. But the thing is, Jamar Smith, he's coming back, and he was the 2023 starter before he got hurt, and then Alex Magoo comes in and takes him to another championship in the USFL. But I think they also added Adrian Martinez, and he might battle with Jamar Smith there. So they've got some depth at quarterback either way. And, and the player that I think to watch for me is like head coach Skip Holtz. He loved Bo Scarborough. And he brought him back, running back, brought him back. Although he wasn't protected, he didn't love him enough to protect him in the draft, to protect him on the roster. He goes into the dispersal draft, and then Skip Holtz picks him back up. So Scarborough could be one of those players to watch. And honestly, Nick, I mean, you got Holtz at head coach who lifted that trophy twice in the USFL. Hard to say he can't do it again. So another player, I'll cheat too. Another player that I think to watch now. I'm going to go outside the box here a little bit and see if you agree with me on this one. A player that some people might want to watch is Chris Blewett, the kicker, because he was great for the Pittsburgh Maulers and helped them win a lot of games. And they had to replace Brandon Aubrey, who a lot of people out there know his name because of what he's done with the Dallas Cowboys now. So I just like that roster a lot, and I like Skip Holtz. So I went to a couple of Birmingham games, so maybe I'm biased, but I think we agree on number 1 there because this just feels like they could come in here and do really well in this new combined league.
Yeah, you could pick like 12 names that as like
right.
A player to watch. I mean, seriously, if you look at every position, they added guys like straight out of the NFL. They really is. Everyone else was kind of sitting back, waiting, trying to figure out like, what are we going to do with, this UFL offseason. They're like, we are going to sign every player available possible to our roster. And then on top of it, they did pretty good in the dispersal drafts too. So they're a force to be reckoned with, especially on that offensive line. They've got just ridiculous amounts of talent right now. So they're the team to beat until proven otherwise for me.
I'm with you on that one. But we talked about too, the XFL champion was Arlington. They've got some interesting picks there. They've got Luis Perez, who comes back. He was, he won a championship, but he might have a battle at quarterback, but I think we both like them.
Yeah. For me with them at 3, I still am very high on that roster. The one thing that like holds them back for me is the aggressive turnover in the secondary, where they are losing every single starter from that championship team when healthy. And although they got a Jeannie Harris and they picked up some guys I like in the off season, it's just we haven't seen it yet from that group. But outside of that, there's still a really good roster. And yeah, at quarterback, I really hope Lindsey Scott and Holton Athers gives Perez at least a really good push, because I like seeing young guys in these leagues that have NFL potential, and I think both those guys do.
No question. We're getting closer to that March 30th kickoff. Now, a lot can happen. You can have maybe some more free agent signings. You might have, some issues in training camp. You never know. But I'm optimistic, maybe cautiously optimistic about this 8-team league and how it gets started. How about you when you look at it? I know you covered both, but when you look at this 8-team league coming together, what do you think?
I think I wish it was 10 or 12
I'm with
team league, where you look at the rosters and you're like, man, these teams are stacked almost too much. It really feels like at certain places you look at certain position groups and you're like, wow, that I think St. Louis has like 9 or 10 offensive linemen right now that were starters last year. And so they're going to be cutting guys who were starting games last year. So that's not a, one-off thing. Every team has a position where you're just like, that's absurd that they have that many good players at that position. So obviously, there's financial things that are above my pay grade, but looking at the rosters, if you're going to spin it into a positive, there's a lot of depth in this league right now. There's a lot of injury-proof teams at the moment.
And that's not a bad thing.